Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night. It's 8 o'clock here in the Eastern time zones. I don't know where you are or what you're doing. Some of you all in California, I know that, but there's other people around. We do this every Sunday night from 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern time. And then everything is uploaded onto the websites, thebibleforum.net, Facebook, YouTube, and then you can peruse. You can do as you see fit throughout the week. And there are a number of people who arrive to watch live. Some show up in the chat room. You ought to try that. Others don't do that. But the majority of the folks pick it up as they go throughout the week. And since they stay there forever, or at least until, some of the old stuff gets recycled, and I get word from people who are upset about something I said 5 years ago. I can't even remember what it was. I had to go watch the video, see what I did. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff, a lot of news has managed to break out this week, so much so that I had to just stop. There was just too much stuff coming at me left and right. And want to get right at that as much as we can. So let's get started. These are the items that made the news this week. Things that I found interesting, things that tie in to the biblical narrative and so forth. And of course, right at the top of that list is this coronavirus thing. And maybe you're getting reports from different places than what I'm getting, but there is no end to the nonsense that's being presented in media land. We are being told that this is the end of the world, and we're being told that this is just a normal event. This happens all the time. This is a new version. It's not going to be any worse than the other. And then there's everything in between. We now know it by a number of different names. We talk about coronavirus. We talk about the COVID, COVID-19, and we are told that there are cases now, people who have gotten this exceeding 80,000 in number. I don't believe that. The overwhelming majority of the cases are still in China. Several other nations, last number I heard was 24, have started to feel some of this. It's a little disruptive in its impact. People are coming down with it. Some people are taking extreme caution in light of this. Some have a lot of people in a small pocket. So far it has not just raged wildly like a wildfire. But there are those who say that it will. I don't think the answer is shutting down the world in order to stop this virus. I mean, it's already out there. Michael Osterholm, who is director of the University of Minnesota's Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, told a website called Vox, V-O-X. It's already out there. There are now about 2,200 coronavirus cases outside of China. That's up only 500 from a week before. In particular is Italy, South Korea, and Iran. They've been hit the hardest. Italy, home to the largest outbreak outside of Asia, has 215 cases. 4 deaths so far. This has motivated the folks there in Italy to adopt what are called draconian measures in order to stop the spread in the northern part of the country. The fact that China's top biological warfare expert, a guy by the name of Major General Chen Wei, was dispatched last month to accelerate containment efforts tends to suggest the outbreak's origin is more nefarious than the Chinese government has admitted. The evidence points to something they call SARS, S-A-R-S, CoV-2 research being carried out in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The virus may actually have been carried out of the lab by an infected worker or crossed over into humans when they unknowingly dined on a lab animal. Now that just sounds gross. That sounds like off the chart. No, that sort of stuff doesn't happen. It's China, people. Things do happen. Whatever the vector, Beijing authorities are now clearly scrambling to correct the serious problems with the ways their labs handle deadly pathogens. In fact, Cotton has not been coy about his belief that China is being dishonest. Last Friday, the Arkansas senator said the Chinese government is, quote, lying to the world about this deadly matter. The potential for a global pandemic still remains high, as the coronavirus has now infected a significant number of people in Italy, opening the door for a European outbreak. And not a few are suggesting the scourge is deliberate. We'll come back to this a little bit later on. There's some details, some lab studies, some scientific analysis, some reports that filtered out as the week unfolded, and some of them very interesting and very credible. Speaking of Italy, the Pope, who is the purported head of the Catholic Church, has now designated tax cuts as sinful behavior on a par apparently with stealing, lying, and adultery. You believe that? Tax cuts are a mortal sin. It is mortal only because, in my view, because of the things they're comparing it with. They're not comparing it with venial sins. We're talking about some serious stuff here. Whichever way you look at it, however, it's sin. Apparently, if you keep your wealth, you're being selfish. In so doing, you're denying the poor their rightful share. That's a sin. Your desire to save or to invest your disposable income, once thought to be a wise and frugal behavior, is now a sin before God. It will condemn you in the sight of God. The Pope counseled his followers to focus on spreading the good news instead of attending to earthly concerns. Sort of a let the dead bury the dead kind of thing. You go on and preach the kingdom of God. Luke 9:60, it's Jesus talking about that sort of thing. One has to look at the Roman Catholic system and the popes and the whole structure, the way they do things, and the tremendous wealth that this nation has. And it just boggles the mind that somebody could come out and say these kinds of things. That people who may have $20, $30, $40, $50,000 in a savings account against their old age or something like that are somehow being selfish. But the Vatican can accumulate huge amounts of wealth, and that's okay. The United States could face shortages of about 150 prescription drugs, including antibiotics, generics, and some branded drugs without alternatives if China's coronavirus outbreak worsens. This is according to someone called Caitlin Owens. Two sources familiar with the list of at-risk drugs compiled by the FDA. It matters because China is a huge supplier of the ingredients used to make drugs sold in our country. And if the virus decreases China's production capability, then Americans who rely on the drugs made from these ingredients could be in some serious trouble. The FDA declined to comment on the list, but said in a statement that, quote, it's keenly aware that the outbreak could impact the medical product supply chain, and has devoted additional resources toward identifying potential vulnerabilities to U.S. medical products stemming specifically from the outbreak. The agency's been in contact with hundreds of drugs and medical device manufacturers and is also coordinating with global regulators like the European Medicines Agency. I think that we're going to hear more of things like that surrounding this epidemic before we're done, some of which is going to be true, some of which is just going to be outrageously false. People just making stuff up. And you wonder, why do people make stuff up? Well, they do. Some do it for popularity, some do it just to get on the bandwagon, some do it without even realizing they're doing it. They just want to talk. In other news, in Toronto, Ontario, we have a Christian counselor. The federal bill that criminalizes conversion therapy in Canada apparently will also outlaw praying and spiritual counseling as it concerns individuals with unwanted same-sex attraction and other kinds of things. This according to a Christian psychotherapist. As the definition is so broad, the bill called S-202, pastors could not even counsel people against watching homosexual pornography, and about 12-step programs like something called Courage, which helps Catholic individuals with same-sex attractions live a chaste life. And then there's Protestant ex-gay ministries such as Exodus Global that would be on the chopping block. But then that's the point, she said. Did you ever think you'd live to see this day? All of this revolves around the idea that these, I want to call them crazy things that we have going on in our society, are okay. And you can try to help people as much as possible, just don't bring God into the picture. If you bring God into the picture, then we come out and we say, oh no, you can't do that, you can't do this. Why? Well, I tend to think it's because we really can't fight God. And I think they know that the drugs and the therapies and all the other things that they trot out here are not going to do anything. But it's going to make people feel good. But when you start bringing God into the picture, nothing we can do about that. And that might actually work. Then where would our livelihood be? I know, that's cynical. On Friday of this week, March 6th, to be precise, that's in 2020 if you're watching this some other year, Disney's going to debut its first ever openly LGBT character. You never thought this would happen, did you? We don't really know the name. They're talking about it in terms of a his, her. His, her's name is unknown. He, she is never actually seen. But a character in there by the name of Police Officer Spectre talks about this person. And it's clear that this person is LGBT. The upcoming animated film is entitled Onward. It's going to feature the first ever openly LGBT character in a Disney Pixar children's film. The movie is set in a fantasy world and it tells the story of two teenaged elf boys who go on a magical road adventure to meet the father they never knew. And it's during the road quest that a lesbian police officer named Officer Spectre, Spectre is actually a cyclops, it's only got one eye, enters the scene. And the character is clearly female. When Spectre and her police sidekick, Officer Gore, pull over a car, the male passenger complains that his girlfriend's children distracted him. Spectre then says, you know, my girlfriend's daughter got me pulling out my hair. Keep in mind, Spectre's a girl. Now, viewers never see Spectre's girlfriend. They never see her daughter. And Spectre is a kind of secondary character, but the moment is nevertheless historical. The LGBT media outlet advocate calls Officer Spectre the first self-identifying LGBTQ character ever in a Disney or Pixar children's film. It's getting so you can't watch a Disney film. Democrat presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg believes Scripture's teaching does not match with supporting President Trump. He says, I'm not going to tell other Christians how to be Christians, but I will say I cannot find any compatibility between the way this president conducts himself and anything I find in Scripture. And this from an avowed and open homosexual. Homosexuality being a direct and in-your-face assault on God. I mean, you really can't be a Christian and support this whole thing, because this whole thing is so against everything God stands for. But, you know, we've changed the definitions of the words, and so you can be a Christian. You know, you remember the God of the universe, the one that made human beings, male and female, created he them. You know, remember that guy? Yeah. Do you know where the vast majority of evangelical Christians live today? Not in New York. No, not in Dallas. A new study has concluded that the most evangelical Christians don't even live in North America. Nor do they live in Europe. Not anymore. According to French researcher Sébastien Fath, most Bible Christians actually reside across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Of the roughly 660 million evangelicals in the world, roughly 215 million are thought to live in Asia. 66 million are based in China, 28 million in India, 16 million in Indonesia, 13 million in the Philippines, and 9 million in South Korea. While it's estimated that around 123 million live in South America, mostly across Brazil, Argentina, and Guatemala. Now, North America, Canada, United States, is thought to have about 107 million evangelicals, 93 million of them in the United States, 10 million in Mexico, 4 million in Canada. And perhaps shockingly, Europe is host to just 23 million. The Reformation started there. Have you heard very much about Venezuela lately? Here's an Associated Press story out of Caracas. 1 of every 3 people in Venezuela is struggling to put enough food on the table to meet minimum nutrition requirements, as the nation's severe economic contraction and political upheaval persists. That, according to a study published just last Sunday by the UN World Food Program. A nationwide survey based on data from 8,375 questionnaires reveals a picture of the large number of Venezuelans surviving off a diet consisting largely of tubers. Now, I'm assuming that's a hot dog, and beans, as hyperinflation renders many salaries worthless. A total of 9.3 million people, roughly 1/3 of the population, are moderately or severely food insecure. That, according to the World Food Program study, which was conducted at the invitation of the Venezuelan government. Food insecurity is defined as an individual being unable to meet basic dietary needs. We in America do not understand starvation. We've never had it. There's a reason for that. And not because the land is rich. Venezuela is very similar to what we are in every way, just about, except religion. Are you ready for the census? That's this year, 2020. In Orlando, Florida, the Associated Press is reporting that there's an important question that spouses, domestic partners, and roommates are going to be forced to confront in the next few weeks as they begin to fill out their 2020 census forms. The question is, who gets to be the primary person in the household? That's right. You have to designate who it is in your household that's the primary person. You know, in the old days, that was Papa. But everybody else who lives in the home has to be identified on the form by how they are related to person one. It's a question that even the most egalitarian of homes are going to have to figure out. It's certainly sure to spark some intriguing conversations. I find it interesting in a culture, a society that is moving away from all of those stereotypes and trying to make it so egalitarian, is now face to face with the fact that in a home, in a family, there is a number one. Excuse me. You get to pick them, but then you all have to relate to number one. It may be that this is a way to find out how many illegal aliens are in your home, or perhaps how many other people are living there that really aren't part of your family. I don't know. But it's an interesting development. Speaking about families, we grew up in this country with a state of the Union that allowed polygamy. It's called Utah. Out there, they are Mormons. They don't call themselves Mormons anymore. They are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They did that to make sure you knew they were Christians. Well, Mormonism is not a Christian faith. It's not even a faith. It's a works righteousness system. But anyway, they believe in plural marriages. They believe that plural marriage brings exaltation in heaven. Even that is a work toward the final goal. And for this reason, Mormons continue to have more than one wife. But they've been doing it under the radar for the last, 75 years or so, because it's not legal. Now, it's not all Mormons who do this. In fact, it may not be all Mormons who believe this particular doctrine. But in Utah, the governor, a fellow by the name of Gary Herbert, has indicated he will likely sign a proposal that makes polygamy between consenting adults a mere infraction, sort of like a traffic ticket, with no possible jail time. It's a bill proposed by Republican Senator Deidre Henderson. The goal is to bring the practice into the light and to try and stop the abuses which populate that underground world. The bill would allow coerced marriages and sexual abuse, and it wouldn't allow it. Outlaw. I can't even read the dumb thing. The bill will outlaw coerced marriages and sexual. The whole dynamic change there. But it also allows victims to reach out to law enforcement when the abuse occurs. Now keep in mind the practice is an obvious violation of the Bible, of the Word of God. But then Mormons have their own version. They have their own Bible. That's why it's considered a cult. They don't like that, but that's what it is. It's a cult. It's a subculture within the larger culture. In this case, the culture being Christianity. There's a war that is going on. It's not a new war, but it is the war between the cross and the crescent, between Christianity and Islam. And that war is being fought today. Chancellor Sebastian Kurz of Austria recently announced plans to shut down 7 mosques in Austria and expel 60 imams. Why? They have been accused of spreading radical Islam and being funded illegally by the Turkish government in what is described as, quote, just the beginning, end of quote, of a crackdown on political Islam and foreign-funded Islamic communities. It also follows a publication of photos from inside those mosques, which surfaced on the interstate, showing Turkish children being trained to be martyrs. In most civilized cultures, that's called child abuse. In a speech at an election campaign rally in Istanbul, the leader of Austria, a fellow named was Erdogan, said they, Australians, have all but declared war. Not Australians, Austrians, have all but declared war on worship, the azan and the mosques. What is the difference between Austria's chancellor today and the mentality of the old days? Well, these measures taken by the Austrian Prime Minister are a fear leading the world towards a war between the cross and the crescent. They say they're going to throw our clerics out of Austria. Do you think we'll not do anything? That means we too will do something. The Muslims are going to fight back. And it won't be a tit for tat. The Austrians will kick guys out that are doing bad things, and the Muslims will do worse. Will that spill over into other countries as well? Other Western nations? Will the world of Western nations come together and fight against that, condemn it? Will that factor into the war that already is raging over there in the Middle East? You know it will. In Finland, both the author and the publisher of any work can be accused of ethnic agitation against homosexual people, a crime described in Section 10 of the Penal Code. Sexual orientation was added in 2011 to a law that had been originally created to punish racism. The state prosecutor general is leading the criminal investigation and has said the booklet, which is still available, incites hatred. Did I mention the author of the booklet is a pastor? A Lutheran pastor. And she's female. I know it's not a whole big deal anymore, but the Bible does limit spiritual leadership to the male of the species, and for good reason. The reason is, number one, Adam was created first. And Eve is the one who violated God's prohibition first. So we have a structure. Not to put too fine a point on the fact that it was a woman. The real issue was Adam's lack. He didn't protect her. More than that, when it happened, he joined her. And the debate rages as to whether or not he did that deliberately, knowing, surmising, that God would make a way for him to be redeemed, but maybe not for her. But if he were joined in, then God would have to do something. If he didn't join in, then maybe God would make another woman. But the Bible specifically blames Adam, maintaining that Eve's sin was the result of being deceived, while Adam's sin was deliberate. Throughout the Bible, it is always the male of the species which is tasked with spiritual leadership. Jesus was male in his earthly iteration. God could have made him a her if he wanted to. He didn't. That he did not is entirely consistent with the premise. Adam was created first. Adam was tasked with naming the animals. Adam's sin was what plunged the species and the planet into moral chaos. The angels which interact with humans throughout the Old Testament always appear as men. The prophets were men. There were a few prophetesses, and it's arguable as to why. Not all were in harmony with God. The prevailing theory is that this too was a jab at man's rejection of God, that God would raise up a woman because there was no man. Sending a woman to do a man's work implied there were no men, or that the men couldn't do right. The female imagery was an insult, a message in and of itself. That this particular culture, founded as it was on biblical principle, could slip so far off course that it would accept female leadership may be a sign from God that we've lost our way. Now, none of this impugns the value of females, except in the minds of those who are seeking to push God and his values out the door, but simply that she finds her value in other things, other ways, not in leadership. There is no male, no female in heaven. The genders serve an earthly purpose, not a heavenly one. And that purpose is oriented toward God and God's plan. Turning all of that upside down is simply another way of thumbing our nose at God. It's not healthy to do, no matter how wonderful it may seem to you. One day you're going to have to deal with the person who said, "Don't do that."